I was talking about the agenda, so the first part, Limagrain presentation, then I will answer to two questions: what EDV principle means for Limagrain, then how Limagrain implements EDV principle in its breeding programs, and then I will go very quickly on the perspective in the context of NBT and provide conclusions. So regarding the presentation of Limagrain, so Limagrain is an international seed group owned by a French cooperative, so it means that it's founded and managed by French farmers. And in few numbers, Limagrain, it's nearly 2,000 farmer members, more than 10,000 employees, number 4 seed company worldwide, and it's nearly 2.5 billion euros in sales. It has different subsidiaries in almost in 56 countries, and it has almost 15% of the sales reinvested in research. So if we go a little bit deeper in the structure of the organization of the group, this group is a specialist in seeds, but also in cereal products. And starting from the Limagrain COP, which is the mother company, there are different activities that goes from the seed to the cereal products. Yeah, from the seeds to the cereal products. And for example, so there is the field seeds and the vegetable seeds activity, which are dedicated to breeding research to the business. And there are garden products and cereal ingredients and bakery products. So this shows a nice and unique chain from the seed to the cereal product. And you can see here some brands corresponding to the different activities. So if we focus on the vegetable seeds activity, so Limagrain vegetable seeds, it's in fact 3 different business units, HM Close, Azera, and Villemorin-Mikado, and it covers, their activity are covering almost around 30 different species, like tomato, carrot, melon, and globally, so today, we are number 1 worldwide, and in the number here of the sales, the 678 millions are corresponding euros are corresponding to the sales of the 2017-2018 numbers. So consolidated sales. Then regarding Limagrain field seeds, there are 6 different business units which are spread all over the world, and the activity are covering almost 10 different crops, and the corresponding sales are around 1,302,000,000 euros. So the first question, what EDV principle means for Limagrain? We believe that there are, in fact, 3 pillars for EDV principle. And the first one is the EDV purpose, the original purpose, the EDV legal framework, and also, because legal framework is not only fascinating, we need EDV implementation guidelines. And so I will go through these different pillars in the following presentation. So the first one, the original purpose. So the breeders are using, this is what had been presented before, are using the existing variability to create new varieties, and this is thanks to the breeders' right exemption. So back in the 90s in Geneva, the UPOV member wanted to and decided to strengthen the breeders' right. And this was made in such a way that the initial breeder's contribution to the new variety that is being created needs to be acknowledged when this contribution is predominant in the new variety. So for us, what does it mean? It means that the addition of a trait, a new trait, even if it's an important trait, cannot prevail on the predominant use of the initial variety. And it means that such variety, new variety created as such, would be EDV in regards of the initial variety. So the second point, so this purpose is in fact, which is based on the predominant use, predominant contribution, is crystallized in the Article 14 that were presented before, and which provide an extension of the scope of the breeder's right and an EDV definition. So just to go very quickly on this definition, so it means that EDV is predominantly derived from the initial variety. It is clearly distinguishable compared to the initial variety, and it conforms, except for the differences which result from the act of derivation, to the initial variety in the expression of the essential characteristics that result from the genotype. So I will not go through the details of this definition, but what we do think is that we really need an harmonized implementation of such definition and its interpretation at the different national levels to remain in full alignment with the EDV purpose that I just presented to you before. Another point which is important for us is that EDV is a matter of scope of protection as such, has to be in the hand of the judge, not in the hand of the authority delivering titles. The last important point is the implementation guidelines. And this consists in the practical rules and tools that can be set it up either in-house in the frame of the company, or that can be agreed at the level of a sector. And for example, I provide here two examples that are in fact presented in the ISF crop guidelines and the regulation. So the first one is the available tools that the sector agreed to set up thresholds of genetic distance, and also to set up specific set of markers to assess such distance. And I will go further a little bit on this topic later on. Regarding the regulation for the arbitration of disputes, this is also an important tool and rule that provides that the burden of proof is placed on the breeder of the putative EDV on the basis of the data provided by the breeder of the initial variety to prove the non-predominant use. We believe that this is an important rule. So whenever one of these three pillars is not existing, we believe that the EDV principle as such fall apart. So before to go on the third party of my presentation, which relates to the implementation guide, how Limagrain is implementing the EDV principle, I would like just to mention that EDV principle is providing for us a balance between, on one hand, the access to the genetic elite resources, and to assess to maintain a certain level of genetic diversity amongst the commercialized varieties. And for this reason, we believe that this EDV principle promotes innovation, and Limagrain aims to develop new varieties taking into account this EDV principle of UPOV. So the third part is how Limagrain implements EDV principle. So there are four basic rules, I would say, and the first one is related to germplasm, what we call a germplasm qualification process for breeding, but I will need to add also to commercialization. And this consists in the centralization of data that are related to freedom to operate criteria. So this can go from IP or legal criteria, and it can include the EDV status also. And so at the end, the germplasm need to qualify and to have a kind of green passport to go to breeding and also to go to commercialization. So the second rule is that we try, when possible, to rely on an EDV-based definition as provided by UPOV. And this EDV-based definition is used whenever possible to determine the perimeter of what we can do, what we cannot do, who owns what, and etc. So this can be handled and used in private breeding agreements. And for example, it's a way when we want to have access to parental lines, and this to cover activity related to breeding, to trade development, and commercialization. And of course, we are dealing here with protected initial variety owned by third party. So this might goes a little bit beyond the EDV principle we were talking about, but we believe that as such, it's a kind of acknowledgement of the EDV principle in our practice. The third rule is rule and tools for practical implementation in breeding programs. And whenever we are using new varieties from the existing variability. So we try to put in place secured breeding schemes, either in wheat or in corn. And for example, this can consist in not using sister lines that are coming from the same hybrid to which we have access. So these are simple rules, but that can be very, very easy to implement, but which are important. Second element is the tools that are consisting in internal set of markers, like that we use in wheat, but also industry agreed set of markers. And this is what we are using also in corn. And I would like to make a little focus on this specific point on using markers. And for this, I would like to come back again in the 90s, where the maize community adopted guidelines on homology between varieties based on Rogers distance. And they set it up a set of SNP markers that defines 3 different zones according to the predominant use of the initial variety. And if the homology is up to more than 0.95, then there is a conclusion that there is a predominant use of the initial variety. On the inverse, in the green part, if the homology is less than 0.91, the conclusion is that there is clearly no predominant use. In between, this is where we need to have a reversal burden of proof. And the potentially accused party needs to open its breeding books to demonstrate that there is no use of the initial variety to create the new line. In practice, we are using these tools in the frame of what we call an in-house FTO-specific procedure, and this can be helpful to monitor the genetic distance between either the parents, like for example, when we start a cross between a hybrid we have access to with our own one of our own line, and this will help us to avoid potential EDV cases. But it can also be helpful to monitor the genetic distance between parents and progeny, and this will be helpful to discard early potential EDV. So in the inverse way, if we have any doubts, we can use also such tool for checking the EDV status regarding our own germplasm of third-party material varieties. The final rule is regarding trait integration. So trait integration are used to create new improved variety, and the rule at Limagrain is to achieve such trait integration in our own germplasm or variety. So we will consider, of course, such new variety as being EDV, but here we are the owner of the initial variety. And some examples of trait that can be used are, for example, fertility restoration, restorer genes, or insect tolerance trait. So what are the perspectives in the context of the new breeding technology? These are quite simple, as we believe that the EDV principle is independent of the type of technology we are using to create a new trait in a variety. So it means that Limagrain will keep the same practice as I just presented to you, meaning that trait creation or integration will be done in our own germplasm material, and so whatever the technology used. But this will be done, as I said, only with the provision that the EDV legal framework and its interpretation remain in line with the EDV purpose introduced in the 91 Convention. So finally, as a conclusion, I would like to emphasize the fact that Limagrain breeding process respects and takes fully into account the EDV principle, and that is what I said, the three pillars: the EDV purpose, the legal framework, and the implementation of tools and rules. EDV principle need to be reaffirmed and confirmed, and the seed business needs to rely on an international and harmonized EDV legal framework which does not impair the EDV principle. And as such, we support the revision of and clarification of the explanatory note. Thank you very much.